We could already see the consequence and very negative consequences of this. And there's no reason why these bureaucrats are ever going to say, wait, this isn't for the best interest of Europe. They don't work for Europe, they work for Washington. So this is the problem. And this is why, yes, in a way, it's the US dumping it on Europe, but it's still an American proxy war being waged. I guess there's no reason for Europe, there's no interest being served in Europe to wage this war or to have any sort of conflict with Russia at all in the first place. So it really is still an exercise of US primacy over Europe and their attempt to extend that primacy over Russia. Well, people do make this point that Europe does not want the U.S. to leave, but who in Europe doesn't want the U.S. to leave? The client regime the U.S. installed into power, they don't want it to leave. Nobody else would be missing out on anything if the U.S. left. Just think back to before 2014, before the U.S. overthrew the government of Ukraine. What was going on between Europe and Russia at the time? A very constructive and growing relationship. There was the Nord Stream pipelines. They were already in operation. Nord Stream 2 was coming online, and they were getting cheap hydrocarbons from Russia. There was peace and stability. This was also opening the way for closer cooperation with the rest of Eurasia, and especially China. The Belt and Road Initiative was reaching its way towards Europe. And of course, the United States found this unacceptable. And this is part of the reason why they ignited this conflict in Ukraine, not just to encircle and contain Russia and to push back China, but also to reassert. If you are familiar with everything that happened all throughout the Cold War, this was a very long process of working America's way into Europe's institutions, capturing them, pushing out people who sought to preserve European sovereignty. Is a long, complex process. But at this point, maybe 20, 30 years ago, this would not have been possible. But today, it is possible. They have finally reached the point where they have the vector sum of control over the political processes in Europe is for Washington at the expense of Europe itself. So that is why they're doing this. There's no reason for Europeans themselves to fight to keep the U.S. there for what? To protect them from Russia, which was never a threat to them in the first place, to protect them from cheap hydrocarbons and greater trade and cooperation with a rising economic giant like China. It just doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense. But in terms of preserving American primacy both over Europe and an attempted reassertion of control over the planet, yes, that makes perfect sense.